Manny had always been a collector of oddities, from seashells shaped like obscure presidents' profiles to mismatched rubber duckies with squiggly eyes. So when he spotted a vintage camera buried under a pile of crocheted doilies at Ms. Puddleworth's estate sale, it was inevitable he'd bring it home. It was a boxy old thing, with scuffed black leather around its body and polished metal edges that gleamed even in the dusty corner. The price tag said $5 cheaper than a sandwich. Manny, for all his thrifty ways, couldn't possibly pass it up. He held the camera gently, trying to see if it even had film inside. It gave off a faint smell, something like mothballs mixed with perfume from the 1920s. It reminded him, unsettlingly, of the outdated cologne that his Uncle Barnaby used to wear and that made Manny's eyes water every Thanksgiving. But something about the camera also tugged at his curious streak. It didn't look broken, maybe just old. A rare antique, he rationalized. Maybe it was worth a fortune. Possibly enough to fund an entire new set of novelty socks he'd been dreaming of. That afternoon, Manny carried his new treasure home, ignoring the side-eye from Miss Puddlewort, who had insisted she'd never seen the camera before that morning. "Probably just another random item the movers found," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Hope you're not expecting it to work. It looks haunted." Manny smiled politely. Haunted or not, he had a soft spot for the weird and wonderful. Back in his apartment, he placed the camera on his cluttered dining table, which was already half buried under a half-eaten pizza and manuals for a new air fryer that Manny had never quite figured out. He tried to open the camera and discovered it actually had a roll of film loaded. That was peculiar, but also exciting. He felt like an archaeologist discovering a secret message in an ancient ruin, except this ruin smelled heavily of must and old perfume. Eager to see if this artifact still functioned, Manny decided to test it out. First, he snapped a shot of his goldfish Bubbles, who seemed immune to the concept of excited audiences. The camera emitted a curious ping instead of the standard click Manny expected. Bubbles merely flicked a fin in nonchalant dismissal of Manny's photographic enthusiasm. Manny placed the camera down and expected the picture to remain stored away until he developed it, but to his surprise, the photograph slid out of a hidden slot at the bottom. It was impossible. This was an ancient camera. How in the world was it spitting out pictures instantly? Manny watched with wide eyes as the photo uncurled in his hand. He was about to wave it around, old Polaroid style, when the image finished developing before his eyes. And there was Bubbles, all orange scales and blank stare, except one corner of the goldfish's mouth was curled in a shape that looked suspiciously like a goofy grin. Manny rubbed his eyes. Bubbles had never displayed any expression beyond his usual fishy blankness, but on that picture, he was definitely grinning like a goldfish that had just won the lottery. "That's weird," Manny muttered. He glanced at Bubbles, who blinked back in the way fish do, yet Manny found himself chuckling at the bizarre photo. Maybe the camera had some odd lens distortion effect. Possibly it was a trick of the old film. After all, film can degrade, right? Curious to try again? Manny took a selfie. He smiled, pressed the shutter. The camera's ping sounded, and instantly a second photo slid out. Manny took it in his hand, ignoring the faint bluish glow the camera's lens seemed to give off. As the photo developed, Manny's jaw dropped. It displayed him baring his teeth in a ridiculous snarl, his left eye half-lidded and his right eyebrow arched so high it practically vanished into his curly hairline. It was an expression Manny was physically certain he'd never made in his life. In the actual moment of snapping the shot, Manny had simply smiled. The photo seemed to have a life of its own. A tingle ran down his spine. Was this camera haunted? He remembered Ms. Puddlewort's offhand comment. Haunting was, of course, ridiculous. He didn't believe in any of that. Except he was now holding photographic evidence that something seriously bizarre was going on. Manny could deal with bizarre, though. If anything, bizarre evidence was his specialty. With growing curiosity and maybe just a pinch of trepidation, he texted Chandra, his best friend since 9th grade. She was a photography enthusiast, with 3 cameras always slung around her neck like a strange, clunky necklace. He wanted her expert opinion. Manny invited her over for pizza and an evening of messing around with the newly discovered camera. Chandra arrived wielding her own set of fancy digital cameras, wearing bright pink sneakers and a perplexed expression when Manny mentioned potentially haunted relic. Chandra looked the vintage camera over. "You're overthinking, Manny. It's probably some novelty camera that warps the photo, like those silly phone filters. Let me see that goldfish pic." Manny handed it over, and Chandra's eyes popped. "Whoa, that's that's actually a weird effect. Could it be tampered film? Maybe there's a chemical property making the picture distort. If it's haunted, it's the friendliest ghost I've ever seen." She took a shot of Manny, too. This time, Manny smiled as big as he could, fully expecting some new monstrous expression. Sure enough, when the photo developed, Manny looked like a cartoon chipmunk hoarding acorns, chips puffed out, teeth protruding. Both Manny and Chandra burst into laughter. Even so, they exchanged glances that shared a subtle sense of alarm. Bizarre or not, something about the camera felt off. Later that evening, Manny and Chandra tested the camera on every imaginable subject. Manny's houseplant, which in the resulting photo sprouted a mustache. The cluttered pile of Manny's laundry, it came out looking like a spontaneously folded sculpture of a giraffe. And even Chandra herself. Her picture showed her eyes crossed and her mouth shaped in a comedic O, despite her sworn statement that she'd posed normally. Each photo was more hilarious and less explicable than the one before. They were having a good laugh, but after a while Chandra grew a bit uneasy. "It's definitely odd," she said, setting the last photo aside, "but I can't figure out how it's happening. I'm going to do some research. Vintage cameras that print instantly, that's suspicious enough, but the distortions, that's something else." Manny nodded, only half listening because he was fixated on the camera. He could have sworn the lens was glowing again. That same faint bluish haze. Maybe it was a trick of the overhead light. He prayed that was it. But something had settled deep in Manny's gut. A mixture of excitement and dread. He was no stranger to weird items, but this camera took top prize. For the next few days, Manny contented himself by pranking a few coworkers with the camera. He'd coax them into group shots. "Hey guys, look at my new old camera," and every single time the results were hysterical. Bob from accounting ended up looking like a blowfish in a business suit, cheeks puffed to near. Jasmine from HR had the world's goofiest wink, matched with her tongue sticking out at a comical angle. Sasha, the receptionist, had her hair stand on end as though static electricity had taken permanent residence atop her head. It was funny, sure, but Manny started to notice people complaining of odd headaches and mild dizziness right after the photo was taken. One morning, Manny discovered a note taped to his work desk. It read, "Stop bringing that cursed camera to the office, Manny. We're done with fish faces. Tilda management." Manny snorted at the piece of paper, but the mention of cursed had him feeling uneasy all over again. Did they know something? Or had his coworkers simply chosen the most dramatic phrase to scold him for pranking them? Even Manny's friend Harold, who was typically a great sport, insisted Manny stay far away until he gave up this new photography hobby. "My face felt numb for 3 hours last time," Harold complained, "and I can't get the image out of my head. My eyebrows looked like they wanted to run away from my face." Manny apologized and tried to promise he wouldn't do it again, but some unstoppable compulsion drew him to keep using the camera, and each time the camera proved that the subject's real pose didn't matter. Whoever got photographed ended up with a ridiculously contorted, comedic face in the printed snapshot. That weekend, Manny decided to do more investigating. He'd found a website dedicated to obscure cameras, run by a man named Mr. Crispin, who seemed to have an encyclopedic knowledge of film photography, plus an eccentric sense of style. Manny emailed him pictures of the camera, the normal pictures, not the ones from the haunted film, and followed up with a phone call after receiving a cryptic response. "If that's what I think it is, be very careful." The phone rang a moment before Manny picked it up. He heard a soft, dusty voice on the other end. "It's Crispin," the man said. "That camera is the works of an infamous trickster inventor from the 1930s, known as Lawrence Oddbody. Legend says Oddbody dabbled in the occult when designing certain prototypes, something about wanting to capture people's true faces or force out the hidden jokes in their souls. Crispin paused as if uncertain or reading from old notes. Rumor has it each camera had a comedic curse, but I always thought that was a hoax. People said looking at the pictures could make you act silly, even beyond just pulling faces in the photo. My advice? Don't use it too frequently. If the legends hold any truth, the negative energy might build, and the camera will start controlling more than just a snapshot. It might make real-life expressions twist on their own. Manny gulped. Are you sure it's that camera? Maybe it's a normal vintage piece that's glitching. If it's spitting out photos spontaneously, that's not normal or glitching. That's magic, my friend, Crispin replied before hanging up. Manny spent the next day restlessly pacing around his apartment, glancing at the camera as though it might jump him at any moment. He tried to put it away in a kitchen drawer, but every time he walked by, it seemed to beckon him. Chandra, who had been texting Manny sporadic camera theories, decided to swing by. She took one look at Manny's face, wild-eyed, disheveled hair, and asked if he'd slept at all. He had not. All right, she announced, setting down an armful of random camera paraphernalia. We're going to figure out how to break whatever silly trick this camera's pulling. She rummaged through her bag. I brought a reference book, Curses, Charms, and Cracked Lenses by Fiona Fludgesworth. It's a weird little ebook I found. Maybe it has something about comedic curses. Manny blinked. Comedic curse? That's a thing? Chandra shrugged. Anything can be cursed if the right or wrong person is meddling with it. They scrolled through the chapters together, skipping sections about cameras that burn holes in pictures or put ghostly figures in the background, until they landed on a passage describing humorous hauntings. The text read, in rarer cases, an object may become possessed by a spirit of mischief, compelling those in its presence to act or appear foolish, often depicted in illusions such as photos or mirror reflections. If left unchecked, the object and its silly aura can become unstoppable, spreading laughter and chaos wherever it goes. Manny sighed. This is all so ridiculous. Chandra fixed him with a serious stare, though her mouth twitched at the corners as though fighting back a grin. If that's the only way to describe it, maybe it is ridiculous, but it might also be real. They read on. The next paragraphs talked about ways to appease or remove comedic curses. One suggested dousing the cursed item in seltzer water, especially if the spirit was rumored to have been a vaudeville performer in a past life. Another recommended burying the item in clown wigs and reciting a comedic monologue. Manny groaned. He could see himself rummaging through a costume store hunting for clown wigs. This was definitely not how he planned to spend his afternoon, but the last entry in the book offered something more plausible. Some comedic curses are undone when the object's comedic potential is fully exhausted in a single, grand spectacle of group laughter. If the cursed item is used in a public forum, like a show, party, or large gathering, where everyone can share in the uproar, the spirit may be dispatched, having fulfilled its comedic quest. Manny's mind lit up. A large gathering, big group laughter, that might be the key to rid him of this bizarre camera's hold. Chandra rummaged through Manny's fridge and pulled out an ancient bottle of lemon soda. The fizz was questionable, but she poured them both a glass for moral support. All right, she said, let's plan some kind of event. We can gather a bunch of folks, we'll take a photo or something, and maybe if everyone bursts out laughing at once, problem solved? Manny shrugged. We can try. Half the people at work hate this camera now, though. Also, I'm not sure I can bribe them with donuts again. They're sick of me pulling pranks. The city's carnival festival is next weekend. All sorts of performers, costume dancers, giant floats, fireworks, and definitely a big crowd. That's where we can do it. We'll stage something that encourages a mass comedic reaction to the camera's photos. If the camera's comedic energy is unleashed in front of a huge audience, chanting and cheering, maybe that'll break the curse. Manny paced the room, excitement growing in his chest. It's crazy enough that it just might work. A plan was hatched. They would set up during the city's carnival by occupying a small booth disguised as hilarious selfies with a vintage camera. The festival crowd was always game for something unusual. Manny pinned up a giant sign reading, "Smile for the nostalgia cam, prepare to laugh." People would flock to it for the novelty, Manny hoped. He wanted as many people as possible to witness the camera's comedic prints at once. The day of the carnival dawned bright and loud. Colorful streamers fluttered between buildings, and the air smelled like fried dough and cotton candy. Manny and Chandra set up their small booth near a lively stage where performers in feathered costumes danced to lively music. The booth was minimal: a banner, a table with the camera displayed on top, an inviting background with silly props. In no time, curious passersby started trickling in, initially drawn by curiosity, then laughter when they saw the test photos displayed in a row. "Come on, folks, get your silly snapshot," Manny announced, trying to sound like a carnival barker. "Vintage camera, guaranteed to make you laugh. Step right up." For that first hour, the camera worked its comedic magic better than Manny had ever seen. Families took group photos, only to erupt in fits of giggles when the pictures popped out showing them with donkey ears or bulging cartoonish eyes. A group of visiting teenagers posed with peace signs, and in the resulting photo, they all had enormous clown noses. The laughter spread from one onlooker to the next, creating a wave of joy that rippled through that section of the festival. Chandra took the chance to snap pictures of individuals from all over the crowd. One woman wearing a glittery carnival mask ended up with the face of a wide-eyed frog in the final photo. An old gentleman sporting a cane was transformed into a comedic pirate with crossed eyes. Everywhere Manny looked, people were either cracking up at the bizarre illusions or begging for a turn. As the crowd grew, Manny got the sense that the camera itself was humming, as if it thrived on the laughter it was generating. He hoped that meant they were on the right track, that the spirit of comedic mischief was nearing its grand culmination. Meanwhile, Manny and Chandra made sure to keep track of how many times the pictures were taken. Each new shot seemed funnier than the last, as though the camera was ramping up its power. At one point, Manny felt the ground vibrate slightly beneath his feet, but he attributed that to the rhythmic pounding of the carnival drums. Finally nearing midday, the crowd gathered in a ring around the little booth, waiting to see if the next photos could top the bizarre expressions from earlier. Manny, feeling a surge of adrenaline, asked for the entire crowd's cooperation. "Who wants to be in one giant group photo?" he shouted. The question was met with roars of approval. People squeezed together in a wide semicircle that faced Manny and his camera. Bystanders in swirling costumes clapped excitedly, and vendors paused their lemonade sales to watch the spectacle. "All right, everybody say cheese!" Manny bellowed. But inside, his nerves jangled. Would this actually break the curse? He clicked the shutter. The camera let out a triumphant ping. Then, for the first time, a bright flash of bluish-white light burst from the lens, so dazzling that Manny briefly saw spots. A chorus of gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by the largest wave of laughter Manny had ever heard. The camera spat out not one but a flurry of black squares. Manny caught them before they hit the ground, each finishing its development in mere seconds. The crowd broke into an ear-splitting guffaw. In the photos, the entire mass of people had their heads swapped with random carnival-themed images. 4 people had big pinwheels spinning on their ears, another 10 had giant cotton candy puffs perched on their heads in place of hair, and others had clown makeup that extended well beyond their faces. Each snapshot was more ridiculous than the last, and the effect on the spectators was electric. People doubled over with mirth, tears streaming down their faces. Colorful confetti rained down, thrown from a nearby float, adding to the chaos. Then Manny noticed something extraordinary. The lens on the camera flickered as if the bluish glow was pulsing, then it faded entirely. A subtle pop sounded near Manny's feet, as if someone had popped a balloon. The printed photos no longer had that glimmering sheen. Manny almost expected the camera to crumble into dust, but it remained intact, just looking ordinary. Meanwhile, the crowd was in hysterics, showing the silly pictures to one another. Manny carefully took another test shot of a random bystander. The camera took a moment, made a soft click, ejected the photo. When it developed, it showed the man exactly as Manny had seen him. A simple, smiling face with no comedic distortion. Manny and Chandra locked eyes in relieved astonishment. It was over. At first, they merely stared at each other in disbelief. Then Manny held up the normal photo for the crowd to see. A few people clapped politely, but most folks were still basking in the hilarious group pictures from before. Manny realized that not everyone had realized a curse had just been broken. They were just happy they'd had a good time. Still, Manny felt a warm glow of satisfaction in his chest. He had put the camera's comedic mania to rest without hurting anyone and given a lot of folks a hearty laugh. The festival raged on, and Manny and Chandra eventually packed up their booth, with Manny carefully boxing the camera. He felt an odd pang of affection for the antique. In a strange way, he'd grown attached to it over the wild week they'd spent together. It was no longer spitting out comedic curses, but Manny resolved to keep it as a memory of the silliest plunge into the unknown he'd ever taken. Back at Manny's apartment, as he unloaded the camera from its box, he took one final shot, a quiet snapshot of Bubbles, munching on fish flakes. The resulting picture was perfectly ordinary. Manny laughed softly to himself. As fun as it had been to see Bubbles sporting a grin, he felt a wave of relief that the camera now operated like any normal antique. He placed it on a shelf amongst his other curiosities, seashells, rubber ducks, and now a vintage camera with a storied past. The next day, Manny scrolled through social media. People had posted photos from the carnival, many referencing the hilarious camera booth. A few fleeting pictures showed folks with bizarrely altered faces, triggering a wave of comments about how unbelievably funny the festival had been. Manny tapped at the screen, smiling quietly. Even though the camera's curse had been lifted, its legacy of laughter, the real purpose behind the comedic mischief, would live on in those snapshots. Chandra stopped by with coffee and donuts. "How is the camera doing in its retirement?" she joked, poking it gently as though it might spring to life. "Peaceful. It hasn't tried to turn me into a cartoon chipmunk again," Manny said, swirling his donut in the coffee absent-mindedly. They both laughed. They ended up reminiscing about the chaos, from that first unsettled fish photo of Bubbles to Crispin's dire warnings, culminating in the carnival's glorious wave of laughter. Chandra teased Manny about how he'd basically become the ringmaster of comedic chaos, and Manny teased her back about how silly her cross-eyed faced photo had been. "I'm just glad we didn't have to stage a clownwig burial," Manny said with mock seriousness, referencing the more outlandish solutions from Fiona Fludge's Worth book. That sent Chandra into giggles, imagining a solemn ceremony with clown wigs and recited monologues. They both leaned back on the couch, content. Manny gazed at the camera one more time, resting in its place among the other bizarre trinkets he'd accumulated in his life. For a moment, he thought of all the pranks and jokes gone awry, the confused scowls of his co-workers, the endless laughter of the festival crowd. It had been quite a ride. If the camera had indeed been haunted, Manny mused that it had also brought people together in uncontrollable giggles. Even if it had meddled with everyone's faces in the process, perhaps there were worse fates for a haunted object. After all, some curses cause terror. This one had at worst induced comedic embarrassment and fish lips. "Hey, Manny," Chandra said, touching his shoulder. "You know, next time you want an antique project, maybe consider something less paranormal." He pretended to arrange an invisible ascot. "Don't worry, next time I go to Ms. Puddlewort's estate sale, I'll steer clear of the haunted corner. Maybe I'll buy a nice decorative lamp or something normal, for once no curses attached." Chandra laughed. "I'll believe that when I see it." They ate their donuts in companionable quiet. Bubbles swam lazy circles in his bowl, minding his own fishy business. The sun was setting outside, sending orange and pink light through Manny's window. The camera, for its part, sat silent on the shelf, no longer exuding that eerie bluish glow. If Manny looked closely, he could still see faint scuffs and cracks in the leather, hints of a centuries-old story hidden between the folds. Yet Manny knew now that story had found its punchline. Its spirit had been appeased by a wave of infectious laughter that had united an entire crowd in a moment of comedic joy. And in the end, maybe that was the camera's mission from its trickster inventor, to show the world that laughter might be a kind of magic. Manny found himself smiling softly at the notion. He stood up to feed Bubbles and turned to watch the last rays of sunlight glint off the camera's small metal parts. After everything, Manny was grateful that the only lasting curse left behind was a memory of unbridled silliness, and maybe a gentle reminder that sometimes it takes a little haunted merriment to make life a bit more fun.